English. Okay? Hands up if you don't speak English. The right question. But we're going to use that as the example. Most of the work that happens in natural language processing does happen with English, but in no way do David and me, particularly David and me, believe that these are the only languages on the planet. Both of us have done substantial work in other languages, and when other languages we don't just mean German, Spanish and Chinese, we actually mean the other languages on the planet, and we will occasionally bring in examples from other languages, but we're primarily going to be looking at English. We're particularly interested in the analysis of it. We have a string of text or speech, but we're mostly talking about text in this course. How do you analyze it to get the information out, okay, such that it is suitable, sufficient to be able to use it for some computer science technique, whether it be that a chatbot, a dialogue system, sentiment exactly. How exactly can we try to get that information out of that? We also care about generation. Okay, so given some internal representation, a table of numbers, a table of facts, how can you generate a bunch of text that reads fluently to a native speaker and gives them the information that's in the table? You might think, oh, that's easy. Sometimes it's easy, and sometimes it's really hard. How do you do it when it's somebody who's a learner of the language? How do you do somebody who's an expert in the knowledge or knows the information mostly? Because you may do that in different ways. Okay? Also, how can you discover things about a language? By reading it. So can you learn facts by extracting the facts out of the language? So if we give you Wikipedia, can you extract all the facts in the world from it? And then people do try to do that, and there are certain techniques that we'll be touching on trying to actually do that. Some definitional things we have to care about. NLP, natural language processing, also gets used for other things as well. NLP is natural language processing. Some people think that is completely the same as language technologies. Me and David are in the Language Technologies Institute, which is a department within the School of Computer Science, at the same level that machine learning is, or robotics is, or computer science department itself is. We probably don't think that in the language technologies because we are specialists in it, and therefore we section these things off. So natural language process to us is dealing with text processing, okay, in a computational way, okay, and probably not dealing with speech, though we'll touch on speech at various points, okay. Some people think that natural language processing is only about analysis. Some people call that natural language understanding when you're going for jobs. Amazon and Apple are going to say we're looking for experts in NLU. Partly they're just doing that so that they can sound knowledgeable about what they're looking for, but they really mean NLP, probably. And they certainly mean people who've done a course like this. You might think that NLP is some specialized linguistic thing, but actually you guys are using NLP all the time when you use the web. When you're doing any form of Google search, Google is doing forms of NLP on the things that you're typing. It's dealing with plurals, past tenses, alternative spellings. It's looking at abbreviations. It's looking at letter sequences to be able to expand them on the fly. And so Google really cares about natural language processing. And in fact, Larry Page, one of the founders of Google, explicitly said that when they named their super company Alphabet. They said that that's what they do. They deal with natural language processing. They deal with language. And that's the core thing that Google is doing. Yeah, okay, Google might be trying to build, I don't know, are they actually building self-driving cars? Everybody's building self-driving cars these days. And that maybe isn't to do with natural language processing, but almost everything that Google's doing, ad recommendation, dealing with Google Home, and interacting, all of that's to do with language. And they're doing it as translation, and they're doing it over multiple languages. So, why do we care about NLP? What are the things that you can use NLP for? And some of these are pretty bold, and some of these are things you've been doing for years. So I'm just going to go through them and give a little bit of background about what they're all about. Clearly answering questions on the web. back in the dim, distant past, sometime in the previous millennium, when I was a younger person who had a shorter beard. Actually, I never had a shorter beard. It was less grey, that's about all I could actually say. And back in those days, if you had questions, you had to go and ask somebody. You had to go to something called a library to be able to look up information. Okay? Now you can ask machines, what's the height of Everest? What's the distance between Pittsburgh and New York? What's the best movie out this week? Well, that's sort of hard and somewhat based on your opinion. But we can ask questions but now we can ask questions to get answers. If it's in Wikipedia, and it often is, but most of the opinion information is not, and certainly localized information, like for example, about 10 minutes ago, my real question was, where is A51 in Baker Hall? Because I didn't know where A51 was in Baker Hall, okay? And Google would not help me with that, okay? But that's a very localized thing that a CMU thing could do. So question answering is an obvious thing, and it's pretty good. Most of the time it will do it. If you ask the question in the right way, you can get it. And a project that we're going to do in this class actually involves doing question answering. So we're going to spend some time on actually looking at that. Translation, okay? I don't really speak any language apart from English and Japanese, and anything beyond that is pretty hard for me to actually read. I can sort of work it out if it's a European language, and maybe I can get the topic if it's in Chinese. But most languages I don't speak, and it would be really nice if I could get automatic translation, so that if I have a document that's in Chinese, I can press a button online and I get English out of it. And although that English isn't perfect, it's still better than my Chinese, and so I can work out what's actually going on in the Chinese and learn something from it. So automatic translation from one language to another, which actually was one of the original things that people cared about in computing way back in the 1940s, is something that sort of works now. Doesn't work all the time, but it sort of works. It's pretty good for doing well-written language things like newspaper articles, but it's not so good for doing things like Twitter. But then, admittedly, me being my age, I'm not very good at reading Twitter in English. I'm not convinced Twitter is in English. I think it's another language. Or Weibo, it's a little hard to actually read, because that's not the same as clearly written, standardized form. Do library research and summarization, okay? So for example, I would like to be able to have a technique that I say, look at all these documents and give me a summary of them. Okay, and I don't want the summary to be there are 17 documents. Okay, I want there to be some contentful description about half of them are talking about this, half of them are talking about this, these are got conclusions, etc. This would be a very useful thing to be able to do. There's way too much information out there, and if something could summarize it in a good way, and maybe even interactively, so I could then ask questions about, well, you said document 3 was different. Why is it different? Tell me more information about it. Okay? And so summarization is one of the things that we'd like to be able to do. And I'd like it to summarize based on my expertise as well. So if I happen to know an awful lot about the area, it should only tell me the things that are different from what I expect. If I don't know anything about the area, I'd like it to be able to explain things in such a way that I can ask further questions and get more information about it. So library research and summarization would be a good thing to care about. Manage messages intelligently. We all get billions of messages every day, well maybe not billions, but they come in with different apps. So you have email, you have Twitter, you have WhatsApp, or whatever you use in your community. There's all these things on Slack that you're supposed to have read but haven't read yet. How can you actually manage that properly instead of having a billion things coming up on my phone saying, you've got a message? It's like, yeah, I know I got a message, but I don't really care. I'm already talking to some Nigerian prince about getting some money, so I don't need to talk to some other Nigerian prince about money. So I'd like to be able to manage these in such a way that I don't have to care. And so it knows about what importance is, it knows about the relationship I have with that other person, it knows that the word urgent from other people is never urgent. Okay? Everybody always puts urgent in their form if it's urgent to them, but it's never urgent to me. Notice that people use the word urgent. But I'd like it to be able to manage that and actually tell me what I really should care about now rather than later. Okay? And that requires understanding something about the message and who you're actually communicating with. Okay? Help make informed decisions. You know, I want to get a job. I want to live in somewhere interesting. What should I care about when I'm actually looking for a job? Yes, there's all these big companies that all pay me megabucks, but do I want to care about things like, do I want to live near the beach? Do I want to be able to afford a house or not? Which is going to exclude some places where there are jobs. Do I want to care about the city that I live in? Do I want to care about schools? Do I want to care about the weather? Do I want to care about whether there's snow in the winter or not? Do I want to care whether there's a public transport system? And what else don't I know about that I should really care about? Okay, so I'd like to get informed decisions and not just search for someone living in San Francisco and then get some report. I'd like it to take all the important information and then be able to tell me answer with query about what's actually going on. Okay? I'd like a robot to be able to follow directions. Okay, all of us here haven't got a problem if we say, here's a robot, it can do anything. The interface to make it do anything is writing some Python code. I'm sure we can all do that. But we all know that not everybody in the world could write Python code. So why can't I tell the robot what to do? So I say to the robot, go and get me a coffee. And the robot says, I don't know how to do that. And so I can explain, well, go to the ground floor of GHC, wait in the queue, and then when you get to the front of the queue, ask for a coffee, pay the money, wait until it gets delivered, and then bring it back to me. So I can explain how to do something, and it should be able to understand that with respect to speech, okay, or natural language interface instead of actually having to do it with Python. If it was a human, that's what you would do. If it was a human, you would explain how to go get you a coffee. You would say, excuse me, but can you tell me where I can upload my Python code to your brain so you can actually go and learn these things. Fix your spelling and grammar. Anybody who's ever received email from me probably immediately knows that my spelling is really awful, partly because my eyesight isn't very good, and it's partly because I'm really not very good at spelling, so I like doing it in my eyesight. But, you know, if you're not native, it would really help if you could actually correct the spelling of English words, because as we know in English, the spelling is pretty random, okay, as languages go. So it's quite hard to get spelling correct, so you want to be able to, you also like grammatical things to be correct as well. And that requires some knowledge about the language, about what words are likely to be correct, what words are less likely to be correct, what is a reasonable way of spelling and what's not a reasonable way of spelling, independent of whether it's a novel word or not. And that's one of the things we'd like to be able to deal with NLP to do. Something that I care about, that maybe you don't, is grade exams. I'd like to have an automatic grading system that actually could grade all of your exams and do it fairly. I could have an automatic system that would grade all your exams, but it would just give you all A's, okay, which you might think is a good idea, but you know, it's not really ultimately a good idea. So I'd like it to be able to understand the question and understand the answer and know whether it's good or bad, or maybe ask me questions when I'm unsure. Already many things out there are using automatic grading, and sometimes it's not doing the right thing, and sometimes it's not doing the right thing in an unfair way. It might be actually dealing with people who are native speakers and deal with that better than people who are non-native speakers. In this class, we don't care what your native language is. We're trying to work out whether you are learning about NLP or not. And so the fact is that if you just to identify some of you, if you keep making mistakes with he or she and keep not getting the or in the right place, okay, you know who you are, that's fine. We don't care about that because that usually doesn't affect the meaning of the things that you're actually writing. Please try to keep that right, but you know, it's okay. That's not what, this is not an English class, okay? This is an NLP class. And so we'd like to be able to have things that fairly do it and can identify what it's doing to be fair, okay? Which brings in this whole issue of how can you build these systems to be fair, and how do you know if they're fair? How do you know if they're unfairly biasing against some community that maybe isn't even obvious? Maybe it discovers that British English, okay, is all misspelled, so it's downgrading every time anybody writes in British English. Well, we all know, no, well, I know because I'm British, that that's the only way to spell it. These colonials brought here. Well, I shouldn't say that out loud. Okay, so these are all tasks that we do, and in some sense they're sort of boring tasks that we try to do. Maybe they're even considered to be artificial. What about creative things? Can we build a system that writes poetry? Okay? What does it mean to be good poetry? That's pretty hard to define what it is. I don't know what it is, but there are definitely people out there who know what good poetry is and know what bad poetry is. And the question is, can you actually build something that gives interesting insight by writing short things? Or novels. Can we actually get something to write novels? And you might think, I really want to do something as hard as that. Well, there's actually other things that would be perfectly reasonable to do in today's society that is very much based on how we interact. And if you think about video games, especially massively online video games, you end up creating tasks in there, and some human creates the quest and then tries to make decisions about it. But they maybe could be generated automatically in an interesting way. And so being able to build video games that have interesting subplots in them that can be randomly generated but still be interesting would be a non-trivial task to do, but they'd have to understand what it means for a story and a plot to be interesting. So that's something that we'd like to do. Listen and give advice. Okay? So you like to be able to talk to your Amazon Alexa, tell her your problems, and get her to give you advice at the end. Okay? Now, although there are systems out there that maybe claim to do that, they probably don't. They probably just say something like, that's very interesting, can you tell me more? But maybe that's what therapists do. No, I don't think it's what therapists do. Maybe what bad therapists do. Can you actually build something that listens to all the information and then actually gives you reasonable advice that you can trust? And how would you know whether to trust it? Okay? My Amazon Alexa said that the most important thing I had to do was buy this new thing from Amazon, okay? Which might be useful to you, but you know, it's probably a little biased on what it's actually trying to do. If your Amazon Alexa tells you to buy something from Google, you can probably be fairly clear that it's really thinking it's a good idea. Estimate public opinion, okay? One of the biggest problems that we have nowadays is actually knowing what people think, okay? Politicians care, companies care, people who are trying to predict what's going to happen in the future care about what people think. And what you can do is you can individually ask each person what they think, and you may or may get a reasonable answer or not. But a good thing to do would be is like, see if you can like sample public opinion and see if you can work out what the sentiment of the crowd is. Okay? What is it? Do people like the latest superhero movie? Well, you can probably count the number of likes and number of times the word sucks appears to be able to work out whether that's the case or not. Maybe. Okay, maybe you could go to movie reviews on IMDb and try to get some number out of that. But what happens, the next question is like, what is it that they like about the movie and what is it that they don't like about the movie? That's a little harder. Okay? You could go and start sampling things and read them, but it would be much better if you could actually do some automatic processing over many examples and try to work out what the common theme is. And try to be fair to it, not ones that you're just understanding that have got the keywords in that you recognize about the other thing. Read everything and make predictions. Of course, this is what we want to do, but ultimately this is going to be the singularity. It's going to read all of the important information in the world. It's going to read everything on Reddit and use that information to make decisions about the future of the world. Hopefully it doesn't use Reddit. But actually, it should be able to read and do that. There's a project here called the Never Ending Language Learning Project, NEL, which has been running for some years. That's looking at Wikipedia-type data and news-type data and trying to extract information from it and build a knowledge graph of what its world is actually like. And that's a very useful thing to try to do. Trying to then predict from there what you can infer from that data is a non-trivial problem, but it's something that we'd like to be able to do. In general, it's probably too hard, but in specific areas, it could be quite easy to do. You could upload all the papers that are getting published at NeurIPS or some conference that you're interested in and say, give me a summary and tell me what's going to happen next, okay? Because that would be really interesting and very useful to be able to do that, okay? Interactively help people to learn. We already have tutors, automatic tutors out there that try to help people on specific tasks, but wouldn't it be really useful if you had something that could sit over your shoulder when you're actually trying to learn, and it could confirm that you're actually learning the things you think you're learning, ask you questions to be able to make sure that you are learning the things that you think you learn, and be knowledgeable enough about the subject that can confirm that you really are learning the right things. So it knows your particular stage and what you're good or bad at, or the best way for you to learn, and be able to adapt and help you to learn. That would be cool. That would be worth a lot. Yes, people are doing things like how to be able to learn a new language, or how to be able to learn quantum mechanics, or some particular subject. But it would be nice if we could have a general system, and it would involve language. Okay? It would have to be able to persuade you to do things. It would have to convince you and be able to know when you're making it up, so that your answer of saying, yes, the answer is 17, as opposed to, yes, the answer is 17, one is you're sure about it, and the other one is you know that you're not sure about it. Or maybe you're lying. But it has to detect whether you're lying, which is help disabled people. Well, of course, that's a good thing to do. And remember that you might think that disabled people are only the people that are going about in wheelchairs or something, or they're blind. And the answer is no. Almost everybody is disabled in some point, okay? So if you take me and dump me in the middle of Beijing, I'm suddenly disabled because I can't speak the local language, okay? If we take you and dump you in certain name of city which speaks a language that you don't speak, then suddenly you don't know, and you'd like to be able to communicate with the people there, and so you're disabled. So can we have a speech-to-speech translation system that actually helps you to do it? Can you, or even if you're just trying to get to a really good Chinese restaurant from CMU campus and you don't know the way, suddenly you're disabled because you don't know the way, and so you want something that can tell you the way, and tell you the way so that you understand it. Does it tell you to go left and go 400 meters and then turn right, or does it say something like go down to Craig Street and turn to Starbucks? And you know where that is, and it knows that you know where Starbucks is, and therefore it's easier to be able to give that information to you. And that's important when you're actually dealing with language. Okay? Help refugees and disaster victims. One of the big projects that we've just finished with DARPA at the moment is, the task is, imagine a big disaster happens, an earthquake happens in somewhere where you do not know the language, okay? And you start getting news reports and social media and radio, TV in that language. Tell us what's gone wrong. Tell us where we've to take our limited resources of actually getting medical, getting shelter, getting food to places, even though we know nothing about the target language. It may be written in a funny script that you don't know. It may be using some base language that you're unfamiliar with. How can it start actually working? And DARPA, who likes to put grand challenges out there, said to us, oh, and by the way, you have 24 hours to do it. So they gave us this information, they named the language, and then what we had to do was we had to apply our technology to be able to do translation, named entity extraction, and information extraction in 24 hours in a language we do not know. Now, we have lots of people on campus that can go and find somebody to try and ask them to be able to help, but we're not allowed to do that, okay? If we happen to have somebody in our group who speaks the language, we have to admit that, but I don't think that ever happened, although sometimes there's a language that somebody almost speaks, some Indic language, and therefore relatively easy to understand for some other Indic speaker. But this is something that's really useful. When something suddenly happens, you don't say, I need $5 million to be able to start work, and we're going to be able to get support for Korea or Uyghur, and then we'll be able to understand it. It's like, no, hands now, what can you do now? And so we had to build systems that were doing cross-lingual stuff, they were actually learning and guessing based on the information that was being explained. We also care about things like indigenous languages. There are about 7,000 languages on the planet, depending on how you count. It is quite hard to count. And most of the language technologies really focuses on the top 1 and maybe the top 5. And Google, that does really well at trying to get diversity in its language portfolio, has about 150. But that's nowhere near enough. There are languages spoken by people in this room that Google has no support for. Do we have any Konkani speakers in the room? Konkani spoken in southern India. There's about 5 million speakers of it, around about the area of Goa. But we also have languages that may have tens of millions of speakers that we also don't have support for. Okay, hands up if you're...
Does Google have support for Shanghainese?
Yes, that's my next one. No, I don't think it does.
Do we have any Shanghainese speakers?
So if you don't live in Shanghai, you probably think Shanghainese is just Mandarin. It's not.
But the writing system is the same.
Yeah, but people don't have a good way and a standardized way of writing it.
Yeah.
Okay? And that actually becomes the problem, that people speak it, but when they ask them to write it down, they end up writing standard Mandarin rather than writing Shanghainese. And Shanghainese has got something like about 60 million speakers, and if you include everything in the Wu dialect, Suzhou and Hangzhou, you're probably talking about 80 million. Not everybody in Shanghai thinks that the people in Suzhou and Hangzhou speak Shanghainese. Definitely the taxi drivers don't, which is the important definition. But that's pretty big, okay? You know, we're already talking about approximately the same number of people who speak German. German's pretty well supported, okay? And it's not as if there isn't any money in Shanghai. So how can we actually deal with that? And this is before we really get to the low-level languages, Native American languages, etc. And this is something that we would really like to do. What you would do for careers, I know you people that actually care about jobs in the end. Well, you should care about jobs in the end. You've got some time to go in your life and you should try to do something interesting. Industry cares about NLP in a big way, and it's growing and growing and growing. If you actually think about the big companies on the planet, okay, the Amazon, Apple, Google, Facebook, Baidu, Tencent, they are actually doing substantial amounts in natural language processing, and so people actually care about it, these companies, and so there are lots of good and interesting jobs there. Governments care about it. Governments, even though sometimes they hide this, actually care about their people, and they actually care about giving information to their people. And their people often speak multiple languages, and they want to make sure that the information gets out there in an understandable way, that they won't make errors. And it might be some naive thing that the government thinks, and most importantly, they at least have to explain how the tax system works so they can get the taxes. But they actually care about, you know, education, and they care about healthcare, and they care about getting information to their people, which may mean they have to deal with multiple languages. The US, even though it has an awful lot of people from all over the world in it, almost all of them speak English, not all, but almost all of them speak English. While if you look at countries like India, that has almost an uncountable number of languages in it, that although many of them speak English, especially those that went to university, many people do not. In China, although many people speak multiple languages, most people who've been to school can speak Putonghua standard Mandarin, but there are still multiple languages all over the country that the Chinese government care about making sure that these people don't get separated and end up wanting to start their own country. Wait, I'm not allowed to say that. What about ethics? Okay. Natural language processing is building systems which will affect people's daily lives. Okay? And you should be aware of that. And you should be aware that the work that we are doing nowadays can have unseen consequences on other people's lives. You may be building a system that's trying to classify somebody whether they are going to get a loan from a bank or not. Okay? And you don't want to accidentally include everybody in some form that is not actually valid of whether they are a good person to have a loan or not, and you're finding some correlated thing that happens to be correct that's not worth it. Here's an example. Within the UK, people were naively trying to work out chances of whether somebody's likely to be an alcoholic or not. And what they did was they first took people's names and they included that in a machine learning firm, and they discovered that if your name was in the first half of the alphabet, you were much more likely to be an alcoholic than if you were on the second half of the alphabet. Until somebody pointed out that many people in Scotland, my home country, okay, funny how we get alcohol very quickly as the first mention of Scotland, but many people in Scotland, they have a particular form of name that begins with MEC or MC, McGregor, McEwen, etc. It means son of in Gaelic. Thus, people in Scotland are much more likely to have a name that starts at the beginning of the alphabet, Vlach. Oh yeah, fine. And people in Scotland are much more likely to be alcoholics than the people in England. So it's wrong that you actually, because that's not actually a factor. It's because you're drinking too much that makes you an alcoholic. It's not your name that makes you. Probably. Yes. You want to work for government? You want to work for government? Our views of government can be very different. You people are international in, even if you were born and bred in Squirrel Hill and just came down from Squirrel Hill to CMU, you're already living in an international world, and we're all aware that governments do really good things and governments do really bad things, and governments change over time. I'd like to complain about Brexit again here, or maybe not.
Do it.
Not going to stop me. Okay? So, but working for government is a good thing to do. Governments have research laboratories. You actually care about doing research. But remember, governments are also spying on people. Okay? But so are Facebook. Okay? So you have to choose whether you're going to search for terrorists or search for who should get the right ad. It's almost the same technology, but you should be aware of that when you're making the decision about where you're going to work. Okay? Let's go a little bit down into more detail about NLP. Because it's important to see some of the low-level things that we're actually going to touch on. More of the technical things. Okay? Analysis, something to do with understanding, but that word understanding is sort of weird. What does it mean to actually understand? Okay? Can we actually give... so if you can say it back, is it understood? Okay. Does your phone understand the telephone numbers that you put into your system? Does the text messaging system understand the messages you send? It can send the messages. Does Siri understand English when you speak to her? Sort of, but not really. Okay. For generation, we have to care about some representation. So supposing you ask Siri, what time is it? Okay. Siri does not just read out the digits that it gets out at the time, okay, and doesn't tell you the number of milliseconds from the 1st of January 1970, which I'm sure you all can immediately convert in your head to actual time. It will say the time is now about 3 in the morning. It will say something that won't be utterly exact, but probably exact enough. And so that conversion is something you should care about. You should also care about what people are expecting with respect to the time. Do they actually want time in the American form, so they talk about 3 p.m., or do they want it to be 1500? Okay, or do they have some other time-based system that's appropriate? Do they just say, it's in the afternoon, don't worry about it? Okay, so how does that information actually get generated? You have a structured piece of information you want to give to the user. What's the best set of words that will achieve that so that the person will remember it, okay, and think that it's normal and not notice that it's weird, which is sort of a hard thing to be able to test, because you say, is that expression good? And you go, wait, what do you mean that expression good? You just told me the time. And then you're doing the right thing, okay? So you want it that you don't even notice that the structure is being given in such a way. We're going to go through a number of linguistic aspects and talk about them in terms of computation and how we can actually build, for the most part, machine learning systems to do that. But we'll sometimes rules because it's a good idea to understand what the underlying issues actually are. We're going to start, I'm going to start at the bottom here and work the way up, and mostly the course goes in that form. There's sort of two distinctions at the moment. At the bottom, we have speech, the noises that I'm making at the moment. You are hopefully understanding what I'm saying. Speech itself is just this continuous set of noise. In linguistics, we've actually partitioned that noise into little segments called phonologies, so we're actually identifying little things like okay, and we're identifying these, and they're different for different people, and they're different for different language, but we're trying to standardize them, but ultimately we're trying to get up to the level where we can recognize the words. People who don't know Chinese always find it strange in Chinese that you don't write spaces between the words in Chinese, but realistically you don't put spaces between words when you speak. We don't do that, and so we're quite good in actually dealing with the fact that there is no space between words when you're actually speaking, so it's not really weird that the text doesn't do it either. It's not the only language that does it, but it's the biggest number of speakers. On the other side, we can talk about text, and we will mostly be talking about text in this course. And text, realistically nowadays, is talking about a string of Unicode characters. If you happen to speak a language that has a writing system that's not in Unicode, you're probably aware that most of your life is spent telling the Unicode standard people to include your writing system in Unicode, because if you don't have it in Unicode, it's pretty hard to do anything. Okay? And there's still languages that have fair numbers of people that are actually quite hard to do in Unicode. Some of the older scripts in Mongolian still really aren't there, even though Klingon is in Unicode? Sorry. We also care about orthography, to actually care about the actual letters that are being used, and whatever script it is, be it Arabic, be it Romanized, be it advanced Romanized, being Hanzi, being Devanagari, whatever it actually is, you're going to have to deal with it, because that's what people actually do, okay? It's all very well saying, I think that Hanzi is too hard to remember, we're going to make everybody write things in pinyin, and the answer, people are going to say, yeah, it's not Chinese, okay? It's not Chinese, even though most Chinese people can write in pinyin because they're actually doing keyboard entry by pinyin. Some languages sort of use both. Most of the Indians nowadays, when they're writing short messages, will use Romanized form and they won't use the native script. But it varies, and people have different choices of what they think it should be, and there's different standardization for the orthography. Once we get above the orthography, we want to deal about how words are actually formed. English and Chinese are probably among the most simple forms, but morphology is where you have a word that changes depending on how it's actually used. The best example in English is, say, plurals. You have a word, and then you put an S at the end, it becomes plural. But even in English, that's not always the case, because sometimes we put other things at the end. Sometimes we put ES on the end and not just S. Sometimes we like words like sheep, is both singular and plural. And some borrowed words, maybe Latin words, will have interesting things that the plural of stadium might be stadia, or it might be stadiums. Both are reasonable, and so you can have choices there. In other languages, it can be much more complex. I'll give you an example of that in a minute. The mappings between these levels are not fully well defined. Okay, people try to define them, and you have to define them for any particular system. But you know, this is still something that's particularly hard, because fundamentally, human language is pretty ambiguous. Okay, it's generated by humans who are not robots, and therefore they do not do things consistently, and everybody does it their own way. There's lots of commonality, but sometimes people break the rules, and sometimes people make errors. And so you have to deal with that in some way when you're actually processing. Okay. Also, the amount of analysis you have to do often depends on the particular task that you're doing. Okay. Sometimes you can just search for a word and it works. Okay. And sometimes you have to get a full, actual, logical representation of every sentence to try and work out what's actually going on. Okay. And it depends on the task that you're assigned to do, okay? If you're just interested in quickly finding out about sentiment, maybe you can look for words that mean good, like the word good, okay? And you can look for words that mean bad, like the word bad. Often bad sometimes means good, but let's ignore that problem, okay? But other times you might have to try and work out things much more subtle than that, and therefore you're going to need much more elaborate ways to be able to do that, okay? And so a single sentence can mean different things depending on the context that it is. Even if you take something as simple as the word yes, what does it mean? Well, it means yes, but it makes a difference about what the context is. So if you ask someone a question and you get the answer yes, and you know that that means that you're supposed to deliver them a Big Mac with fries, okay, so you now learn that the word yes means Big Mac and fries. It maybe doesn't the next time somebody asks a question about, would you like a salad? And the person says yes, and so you get Big Mac and fries. Okay? No. Context is actually quite important when you're doing that. Okay? There are many, many, many ways to say the same thing. That's something that what natural language is all about. Okay? And no matter how many ways you individually think about how to say something, the person next to you will come up with 5 other ways you never thought of. And the person behind you will come up with even more. So if you're trying to work out all the ways of saying good things, you'll get some examples of it, but you won't get everything. You really need to actually sample from what people do. Because people are generating this much wide variety of things that you are pretty good at understanding. Yeah, there's situations that you might not understand, but for the most part you understand it and you're very good at understanding things even when you see them for the first time. But it's very hard for you to generate everything. Everybody has their own language and it sort of overlaps, but not quite. And you should always be aware of this whenever you're thinking of examples or whenever you're trying to think of truth in trying to understand what's going on, is that the person next to you is going to come up with another sentence that's completely fine, completely in domain, very appropriate, not a weird metaphor type thing, as direct as what you think, and you've never thought of it. So one of the things we do is we deal with models. Again, I mean, a computational model, what is a computational model? A computational model is something, okay, that has a representation, so it's probably going to be a bunch of numbers, it has some structure to it. Importantly, it should be able to make predictions about the future, okay? And when I say predictions about the future, I don't really mean it'll tell you what the lottery number is for tomorrow, but it should say something about the probabilities of something happening in the future. What's the likelihood of a person asking this question? Or what's the likelihood that if the person says this, then they're happy about it, okay? And if they say, this is the best thing I've ever seen, okay, then it's probably the case that it's good, but maybe not, okay? Because maybe they say that they're blind or something, and therefore they can't see it, okay? What we are, also the models that we come up with will be partial. They will not be able to deal with everything in the world, okay, because that's too hard. Even you individually can't deal with everything in the world in all possible languages all the time, and so it's going to be constrained. And if you constrain things in the right way to the domain that you actually care about, it can still be a massive domain. If it's not your domain that you actually have to list all the sentences in, but it should be targeted towards the domain, because we all deal with different things of different domains all the time, and we'd like to be able to have models. There are many tools, toolkits for dealing with NLP. We'll be talking about some of them. You'll find many of them online. For some of the homeworks, you'll be expected to do things from scratch, and for some of the other homeworks, you will actually be expected to use these toolkits. Particularly the project, we're expecting you to use existing toolkits that are out there, because they're really good and they're well designed and suitable for doing things like this. And you should be familiar with the toolkits and know what they can do, know what they cannot do, so you know when they're got limitations around. Okay? And again, one of the things that we'll stress through the whole form is that sometimes it's much simpler than you think. Human language is unbelievably complex, but sometimes a relatively simple model actually gets pretty far. And being better than that is just too much work and it's not worth it. Okay? So sometimes simple keyword matching actually does really well for languages. Okay? Depending on what you're doing. Okay? If you want to estimate something about sentiment, okay, sometimes just a list of keywords will get you really far, as long as you've got lots of variety in the information that's coming in, so you won't be able to actually know what everybody's tweet says, but if you know that 20% of the tweets that you can deal with are 19% positive and 1% negative, it's probably the rest of them are. As long as you're happy that you haven't just found the things that, the same distribution is there in the bit that you're not doing. We'll be talking quite a bit about formalisms and algorithms. This is not a machine learning class, okay? And we're really trying to teach you the things in language that make a difference to machine learning. So the features that you might actually consider putting into your machine learning. We are going to be using machine learning in this, but we're fundamentally not just saying, here's machine learning, and we're going to do some NLP classes that are true in some of the other classes here, which you should do because they're really good in other things too. Here we're trying to teach you things about how to deal with language and the features that are important and relevant when you're dealing with language, when you're dealing with building some computational machine learning model or some rule-driven model, and you want to know what sort of information you should put in there. Should you put in words? Should you put in stem words? Should you put in part of speech tags? Should you care about syntax? Should you not care about syntax? Should you find some other way to be able to extract information? Should you care about some form of normalization such that things are going to get trained better? And that's what we're actually caring about in this class. Okay? So it's important to actually... Language technologies is one of these interesting subjects where working out success can be incredibly hard. Okay? I actually believe that all the interesting problems in language technologies have very hard evaluation issues with them as well. And that's what makes them interesting. I work in speech synthesis, and it's very hard to know whether this speech synthesizer voice is good or not. We can do it in a general sense, and we can try to build models which will actually try to score whether a voice is better or not. But ultimately in speech synthesis, it's whether, do you like it or not? But that seems a pretty weak way of trying to work out. But if you actually do experiments, and I play a bunch of examples to all of you, and I ask which ones you like and which ones you dislike, actually it'll be somewhat correlated. Okay? Now you'll have different preferences, but in general you'll like the likable ones and you'll dislike the unlikable ones. Okay? Building a machine that can try to predict that is still incredibly hard. Building a dialogue system to know whether you're successful or not, well, yeah, if it's doing some task-oriented thing, you can measure whether you're successful in getting the task. Did you give the time? Did you give the weather? Did you get the person on the bus that they asked about? But if the dialogue system is a chatbot whose purpose is to entertain you, okay, can we measure how well we entertain you? So at the end of, I'll tell you one thing, if you have a dialogue system that tells jokes and interacts with you, and at the end it says, please tell me a score of 1 to 10 of how well I entertained you, okay? The answer will be -10, because people don't want to answer the question about how well they were entertained. So you won't get the information. So you have to have some other way of trying to work out whether somebody is entertained or not. And that might be, do they come back and use the system again? Do they tell their friends? Okay? Some other way, indirect way of measuring success. And almost everything we do in NLP ends up with there's not a really good objective way to measure whether you're doing the right thing. Sometimes there's core things, and there has to be core things when we're building machine learning techniques that allow us to be able to have a loss function that we can try to minimize. Okay? But that's always a proxy for the real thing. So you have a syntactic parser, and it works 92% of the time. Is that good? Well, that's not really the right question. Is it good enough? Is actually the right question. Does it make your problem better? Okay? Now, if you want to be really direct about this, we have a project that's in this course. You're going to build question-answer systems for Wikipedia articles, and of course you're going to try and work out whether your questions and answers are good or not. And maybe the ultimate goal there is to get a high grade in the class. Okay? So that's what our measure is going to do. So what we're going to do is we're going to repeat this class for the next 10 times with the next different ways of building your system and find out which system is best and see whether you get an A or an A minus or a B plus. You're probably not going to do that multiple times. We have to have proxies for that. And that's something, again, that we'll return to when we're going through the class. Evaluation is really hard, okay? But that's part of the problem, okay? It's not a bad thing, it's an opportunity, as they try to tell you about. What are some of the key applications which are happening at the moment? Computational linguistics is getting pretty good. We're beginning to use it. It's relatively robust. And so people are actually doing that. Information extraction on open tasks is beginning to sort of work. I mean, it depends what you mean by open, but newspaper reports extracting who's being talked about and what's happening to whom. sort of works. Doesn't always work, but it sort of works. Question answering is pretty good if you have something that has the answer in it, but most of it's still looking at, you have a paragraph that has the answer in it, and you're going to go and get the answer out of it. So if you ask questions about that are in Wikipedia, what's the capital of France? Somewhere in Wikipedia it says Paris is the capital of France, or it might say Paris, comma, the capital of France, comma. But you could work that out. But things like how many European capitals are on a river? It's probably quite hard to do from Wikipedia, because you'd have to try and work them. Or how many astronauts that have left the planet have had children after they've returned to Earth? Okay, that information's probably in Wikipedia, but you'd have to go through and try to find out, dates of people having children, which may or may not be there. Okay, anything that requires looking over multiple documents can be particularly hard. We really haven't got this out. And anything to do with opinion, we're not really good at yet. But we're trying to get better on that. Machine translation has definitely improved quite significantly in the last 10 years. It used to mostly suck. Maybe Spanish and English was okay, but now it mostly works. But it's still pretty bad. When you read Chinese, so if you speak Chinese, do translation into English and see how funny it is, and the reverse. Okay, how often it gets utterly confused about things that sort of shouldn't get confused about, and it does silly things. But it's still way better than nothing. Okay, of course, for languages you know, it really sucks. But for the languages you don't know, it works perfectly, or so you think. Okay, and I'm really pleased about my new phone, which came from Nokia. This was some time ago. I remember I bought a phone directly from Nokia, and when I looked, it was in Swedish, the actual review of it, and I translated it into Swedish. It was very good. And apparently, my phone had ice cream on it. And it was because there's a type of glass that's called ice, and it got mistranslated as ice cream rather than as a particular non-scratchable form of glass, which is not obvious. Summarization is also hot. There's just so much information. I just want to know the important information. So here you are sitting here. What you really want to know is, what did that bearded guy at the front actually say in 4 sentences at the end, so that you know what you have to remember for the exam? And the answer is, none of this will be on the exam. Except where it will be. Oops. So if you did the wrong extraction. Opinion, sentiment, analysis, that's always a big thing. This morning I was talking to JP Morgan. One of their specific problems is, how can you actually work out what their customers like and dislike? They know that in the complaints that they're complaining, but what are they complaining about? And how can you classify these as the same thing? What do they like, what do they dislike? And the customer doesn't know the best way to describe the thing that can be solved. So they complain about something that's only a symptom rather than the actual problem. And these are hard problems, and big companies really would like to do this as automatically as possible, because they cannot read everything. Social media analysis, lots of information that's happening that's being posted online, and you want to know what's going wrong. Google a number of years ago tried to work out if they could work out about flu epidemics that were happening based on who's typing in questions to Google about symptoms of sore throat and coughing, etc. And although there is a correlation, it was pretty hard to actually work out where the flu was moving, because it doesn't move evenly and it moves at different levels even through the same city. Google's pretty good at knowing where you're from, because it can trace IPs. Not always, but in general, it knows when it has got confidence to be able to do that. But they like to be able to do that. And fake news, okay? Fake news is basically destroying the world at the moment and causing people to have opinions that may not be true at all, and just select the views that they would like. Fake news is being generated both deliberately and non-deliberately. How can you actually detect it? How can you tell people it's fake in such a way that they actually believe that it's fake? Now, it gets very hard if you think fake news is something to do with truth. Most real news stories do not have 100% truth in them. Okay? and especially as a story is happening, more information comes in and they refine their forms. Almost all mass shootings first get reported as multiple people shooting. Almost always, okay? Because it's really confusable if it happens, okay? The police know this, and they know that there may not be, but it might be reported, but they can't afford to say there isn't. And so does that make every report about mass shooting fake news? No, it doesn't in any way whatsoever. It just means you should be aware that some things are going to be true and something not. While things that are explicitly saying things that are completely over the top, I remember a wonderful one that was done in the UK by a tabloid a number of years ago. It said a World War II bomber was found on the moon, and it was talking about how scientists were baffled about this, and then there was lots of the other newspapers saying, look how stupid this newspaper is saying something like this. And the next day I felt that they had a wonderful reply, and they said, yesterday we reported a World War II bomber was found on the moon, and today it's disappeared and nobody can find it. Isn't that amazing? Which meant I bought the newspaper for years because I thought it was really fun. What about brains? We're doing AI here, so it must all be about brains. Okay? I'm sorry at this point, no brains will be hurt or affected during this course whatsoever. Okay? I have to admit that one of my graduate students has gone to University of California, San Francisco, and he actually sticks pins in people's brains and actually puts electrodes inside their brain and tries to work out what they might be saying. He's doing this for people who can no longer talk due to some disease or some trauma, and he's trying to get them so that they can actually control speech again. That's way cool, okay? But we're not doing any of that, okay? NLP is a much more computational, machine-based notion. There's another subject that we are going to distinguish between, although sometimes we conflate them, we're called computational linguistics. In computational linguistics, what we're interested in, and I have a PhD in computational linguistics, in linguistics, what we're actually looking at, trying to come up with computational models of human processing of language. While in NLP, I always think we're trying to come up with machine techniques for dealing with language. Sometimes these overlap, and definitely they inform each other, okay, but they're not the same thing, okay, and that's important to realize. So we're doing NLP here, rather than actually looking how humans deal with language, okay? It might be the same distinction depending on your view of the distinction between artificial intelligence and cognitive science. Cognitive science is looking at how the human brain deals with intelligence, while AI is my PhD is from a department of artificial intelligence, which I'm trying not to tell people, even though I just did. Because even at the time it was like, wait, what? There's an actual department of artificial intelligence? Is it full of robots? Yes, let's look at some of these levels. Let's look at morphology. I mentioned morphology, how the words change over time, and how the same root word may have different modifications for it. And many languages have pretty complex form of that. It happens in two of the most common languages spoken on the planet, English and Mandarin, do not have much morphology. It's not that they have none, but they don't have much. A language like Turkish, so we have this big long word here. Do we have any Turkish speakers in the audience? 1 in 3 years now. Any Turkish speakers? Turkish speakers. Good, so I can say anything about Turkish, nobody will know. This big long word here means behaving as if you are among those whom we could not civilize. One word, okay? And yeah, that word's a little unusual, but it's not really that unusual, and they often get words of that length, okay? Many languages do this. Many languages use simpler forms, so if you look at the Indic languages, Hindi actually cares about gender and agreement between the nouns and the verbs, and so they have modifications. Japanese cares about lots of things that in English we would do with auxiliary verbs, but they actually put them together into a single word. And so these things are complex, and if you're dealing with processing in these languages, the number of words that you find in language, the number of unique words you find in language, is much, much bigger than in English or in Mandarin Chinese, because for each word there's all these other modification forms of it rather than second. English still has a certain form of productive morphology. The word unfriend didn't exist 30 years ago, okay? And I was desperately waiting for the word to be invented so I could actually start to unfriend these people that I went to college with, speak with. Okay? Obamacare is a made-up word, okay? And of course it can be used almost productively because you put care in the end, so you can talk about Romney care as well. In the US, due to a political thing that happened back in the 1970s at the Watergate building in DC, now for any big serious political scandal, we put the name Gate at the end. And so we're now using the word gate to say political scandal. And people use it to try to pretend it is a political scandal, even when it's not, and they also will avoid it if they don't want it to be a political scandal. So it's actually, we also have things like even just apostrophe S. Apostrophe S is a form of morphology that's telling you something, and you want to know that Bill, apostrophe S, and Bill, okay, are talking about the same thing. Okay? Yeah, one of them is the possessive, and one of them is just the nominal. But you want to know that, and if you want to do matching, you would really like to know that. The actual lexemes, if we go further up, we have to care about words, we have to care about the little tokens, and we have to make decisions about what these actually are. Okay? Only some of you can probably actually read that. Okay? It's something about the Parallel Olympics and getting tickets or something, sort of form. Where was it written? Yeah, it's traditional. So it probably was written in Taiwan. It could be Hong Kong, okay? It's weird. I asked somebody, because I looked at it and thought, this is traditional, it's not simplified. In mainland China, they have a simplified form. It's not simplified if you don't know it. They're less approximate. While historically, they used a more complex one that's got too many scopes in it. No, that's not true. Okay? And Japan sort of uses those-ish, maybe. Taiwan is really the only place that still uses traditional. But Hong Kong, when writing the other language, major language that uses the same writing system, Cantonese, we use traditional. But there's still different forms of traditional. And I'm now a little worried about this. There is some funny form selection. Okay? But this is Chinese. This doesn't have spaces between words, for those of you who have not seen that yet. And somehow you have to make a decision about where the word boundaries actually are. Otherwise you can't process it because they're too long. Okay? And there are fairly well-defined ways of doing that. Not all Chinese people agree. But hey, not all English people agree on where the word boundaries are. Most English speakers are quite happy that spaces define words. And then you say, well, what about New York? And is that a word or is that two words? And they then want to change the subject because they don't really want to answer. We're not allowed to change the subject. We have to work out what these words mean. We have to work out that the word apple can actually mean apple has got two meanings. Okay, it can mean the company, okay, or it can mean a computer. Okay.
It used to be a fruit.
Fruit? Okay. So apparently it's a fruit named after it's called an apple. Okay? And so when you see the word apple, it doesn't necessarily mean the same thing. And sometimes it will say, you know, Apple computer, and sometimes it will say Apple Inc., and sometimes it will say, you know, Apple crumble. And so you'll have some context that will allow you to do it. But usually the context will do it, apart from sentences like the word apple has got three meanings. So it's got three meanings. And so we have to deal with that. Not all words can be done in isolation, and not all words you need to know the context of what's going on. We have some interesting verbs in English where we have verb particles with them, so you know, take on and take off. And they mean specific things. You don't even have to be right next to each other, so you can insert noun phrases in there, so we can actually all that. Let's go on to syntax. Syntax is trying to tell us information about who does what to whom, how things join together. It's not just a simple string of words, there's actually order to them, and there's actually a relationship between between them, and that's important. It varies from language to language. Typically, but not always, the more complex the morphology, the more you're allowed to move the words around. But it usually means something slightly different. And in English, you can move things around as well. I can say I found a ball. I can also say a ball I found. And so I can topicalize something and put it at the front, and it still sort of means the same, but there's a different emphasis. People say things in multiple ways. There's not a standard canonical way of doing it. So when we're doing processing, we need to be able to understand that variation there and get a representation that allows us to be able to say that these are the same or that they're different, even though the surface words might be written in quite a different way. There are some forms of confusability that actually happen in English, particularly what's called prepositional phrase attachment. And so John saw the woman with the telescope wrapped in paper. There's a number of ways to actually interpret that. The woman could be actually wrapped in paper. Bit weird, but it's possible. Okay? And it could be that the woman has a telescope, or it could be that John did the seeing with the telescope. So the telescope is with the see. And depending on the context, you won't even notice that there's ambiguity there. Most of the time you don't actually get that confusion. Okay? We go further up the chain, we get into semantics. Semantics is sometimes very well defined and sometimes not. If I say to a robot, move forward 5 meters, it's very clear that the semantics is the function that causes the robot to move forward 5 meters. Okay? But most of the time the semantics is not as clear as that, and therefore it can get quite hard to work out what the meaning of a particular sentence actually is. Okay? And there's lots of non-trivial interesting things. If I say a seat is available for every customer, supposing I have, I'm selling tickets for the plane, and I say the plane takes 60 people, and I say a seat is available for every customer, how many seats do I have? It could be one, so let's go for 60. Okay, so 60 first. But if I say a telephone number is available for every customer, it's not the case. You have a different telephone number for each 60 people. You don't do that. Or a website is available for every customer. You don't have 60 different websites. So depending on sort of the context that you're in, you interpret these exactly the same syntactic form in a different way, and that becomes important sometimes. You have to be able to understand what these things do. Often legal documents have to care about this, but often just try not to confuse the person that you're actually speaking to. And at the higher level, pragmatic, sometimes we don't do the most obvious thing. There's a classic sentence of can you pass salt? Actually, it's an indirect speech act as a command to get you to pass the salt. Okay? But of course, everybody's done the trick. When somebody says to you, can you pass the salt? You say, yes. And then don't pass the salt. But one, that's likely to get salt thrown at you. So don't. But you understand that there's an actual meaning to that sentence and there's an intended meaning to that sentence. In the same way that if you're in an American bar and barman says, is he 21? You can answer the question, yes, he's 24. 25. Okay? It's like, that's stupid if you're asking somebody their name. Is he 21? Yes, he's 25. But if the intention of the question is to ask if he's 21 or over so you can actually drink, that is a perfectly reasonable answer. But it's not a very simple semantic answer. The whole notion of discourse and context and what's adequate to be able to do it becomes really important because we're building dialogue systems that are actually interacting with humans. And that's important to be able to get that information across and make sure that we have the right meaning and that the user knows that we have the right meaning and doesn't think it's weird and doesn't get confused and is happy about the interaction. All of that stuff is really hard. A substantial number of my students have now graduated, both masters and PhD, have gone to work on systems like that, Siri, Alexa, and they're actually trying to work out, how do we make the system do the right thing when the user asks stupid questions. They're not allowed to call them stupid questions. In order to be able to get everybody happy, ask for confirmation when it's appropriate, ask for confirmation, make assumptions about knowing how this person asks, For example, with the Alexa system, you can say, Alexa, do I need my umbrella? Okay, that's a really weird question, but what it means is, will it rain? Okay, and Amazon know that, so they says it's not going to rain today. Actually, they usually put a percentage and say there's only a 5% chance of rain today, so don't blame me. And so, interpreting what the intent actually is, rather than what the surface meaning is. Okay, and there's a website, but that's not the website.
That is the website.
That is the website. Okay.
Be sure to put HTTP and not HTTPS.
Oh yes, yes. Because actually we're doing everything open, and people will be able to steal things. Actually, no, because of part of the website you actually have to authenticate yourself with. There's a book. The book is excellent. Okay. Sometimes it gets new versions, and at the moment there's a third edition coming out, but it's not out yet. A number of chapters are available on Dan Jurassi's website at Stanford. We sometimes refer directly to those chapters, particularly on the water trading stuff, but it's okay to use the chapters if you can find them on Dan Jurassi's website. The book is pretty good. It's not particularly expensive, and we do expect you to actually read it. We have got questions in the exam that we deliberately do not tell you about that are only in the book. Try to get you to read the book. Okay? And at the end of most lectures, David and me will say, read the book. You should read the book. Okay? We'll tell you about the teaching assistants. We'll tell you about the various times that we're going to set up in office hours so that you can get information. Okay? Over the next couple of lectures, we're still just going to fill things in. I'm going to talk to you this week about the project. You will be expected to form teams of 4 for the project. So you can start thinking about that. And quite soon there's a homework that depends that you actually have your team. So please do that. Everybody who is on the wait list has been let in if you don't have any other conflicts. If you have other conflicts, we cannot let you in, and so you have to release these other conflicts so that we let you in. We're trying to get everybody in, okay? If you have any complex questions, come and see me and David afterwards. Okay?